All right, welcome to Now This Is Podcasting. I'm your host, Connor, and I'm here with Calvin.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And thanks for doing this one. I know I'm a little under the weather, but I'm glad that we got together to record this. We're doing Pan's Labyrinth today.
Yeah, very excited. So the reason we're doing this is because Guillermo del Toro's Nightmare Alley comes out December 17th, and so we wanted to talk about his... I feel like this is his most talked about film, critically highest, I think, rated, and then you have The Shape of Water. But I think this is the one... This one sticks out more in his collection than Shape of Water does. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. I went and looked at some contemporary articles about it. Like Roger Ebert says it's one of the greatest fantasy films ever made, despite it being in like a war setting. New York Times has glowing review about it. The Guardian has a lot of superlatives in its article about it. So it was really well liked when it's released, and I think it has definitely stayed like one of those like kind of mainstays of his filmography for sure.
Yeah, I think Metacritic even still has it as rated as being like a 98, which is crazy. Metacritic is the most critical review aggregate website that I've ever found. So the fact that it has a 98 is incredible.
And here we're going to do a two-part review where we absolutely tear it apart. But yeah, so this is directed by Guillermo del Toro. It had a budget of $19 million, and it made 83.9. It made $84 million. I'm always just really impressed by, non-English speaking films that do well in the U.S. There's just so many people who are like, don't want to take the time to, or they're like, oh, it's not in English, like not worth it. And despite kind of some of the ways I'm critical over this movie, I still find it super fun to watch. I do like this movie, and I think it is good. But I always like Parasite came out, and that did so well, and that's like one of the best movies I've seen in a long time. So I always appreciate like the non-English speaking films that come over and do really well, and this did well. And it's just about like 2 hours long. But yeah, what was your first impression of this one?
So I want to say that I first saw this movie in 2007 to 2010, somewhere in there. But I feel like it was 2009. But I loved this movie when it first came out. I mean, it's the story of a child making sense of her world through fairy tale trials that mirror the problems that she faces in her real life. It has this fantastic world building, exceptional costuming, so much charm. It also has a lot of flat characters, half-baked themes, and a rebel subplot that completely distracts the audience from the heart of this movie. So this movie is really a mess.
Yeah, I think I saw this pretty much like around when it came out in like 2006. I remember seeing it like pretty early. I always thought it was really neat, kind of taking the whole fairy tale idea and kind of turning it on its head, making it really dark.
Yeah.
For me, it was kind of the first movie I think I'd ever really seen like that was so dramatic in that way. But it's been 15 years, and I've seen other movies since then. But that was probably like the first one I was like, ooh, like this is like a really creepy fairy tale movie.
And really gory.
Oh my goodness. It's kind of amazing how it seems to somehow fit well, despite it being a little girl kind of running around on these little adventures. Like it all like all that stuff works out so well for me. I think there's a lot of interesting aspects to it. Like you said, some of the best stuff is all the prosthetics, all the creature designs. I love that about this movie. All the fantasy elements really work for me. But in the end, this story is so cluttered, and it's like you said, it's like two different stories competing with each other, and they don't seem to be cohesive at all. So that's kind of like where my big issue comes from it. All that being said, I still this is still a movie I just sit down. I had no problem wanting to watch this and do a review on it, because I just like Pan's Labyrinth. I think it's a fun movie.
Yeah, and so I might sound a little bit hypocritical here because I waxed poetic on some of our other episodes, especially the one about Mother, where that movie is a disaster. I mean, really, like in terms of like so many different elements and all of them saying different things at different times. But the difference here is that the whole point of this film is a straightforward narrative, and you can't make it a mess then, because it needs to be a story. Everything needs to be connected.
Yeah, I think one thing about Mother, because I agree that movie is a mess, but it's a mess in a way that's like anxiety inducing, and like that's the point of that movie. So it's a mess in service to the film. It's a mess in service to its own narrative.
Right, as an element.
Yeah. Whereas this movie, it can't, like you said, it can't be a mess, because now I don't know really what the point is anymore. Like I don't know what are my character motivations. What is the goal here? Because like you said, it's supposed to be a straightforward narrative. I do have one question for you. You had a note on it. This is not. It's also weird too because when the film ends, it has a different title at the end.
Yeah, El Laberinto del Fauno, which is just the Faun's Labyrinth. But the name got changed for a lot of Western-speaking, or a lot of Western countries because they felt like the Greek god Pan was a more recognizable character than just... So that there would be like more audience draw to see Pan's Labyrinth rather than the Faun's Labyrinth. That being a little bit more vague and obscure. And like you said, there's already like... you have a difficult time having Americans go and see something in another language because we have such an abundance of film already in English. What's the point of seeing something in another language? So they just really we'll talk about this later, but like it's not the god Pan, and that's a big problem when you're talking about like an audience member's reaction to or perception of this character. They're very, very different.
Yeah, I think probably the first time I watched it, I was like, wait, so where is Pan? Like,
yeah,
well, I don't know. It's like we already talked about the story kind of not. It's kind of working against itself by being not not as straightforward as it should be or could be, and then to also have a title that doesn't really make any sense with it. I think that's odd. I think you just stick with your guns and you release it with the title it originally had or its Spanish title. I think that's so odd, but all right, so I want to move on and talk about the aesthetic of this film now.
Yeah, and this is so important for Guillermo del Toro, and I want to make a distinction about like what kind of creator he is. Like he is a world builder, he's a storyteller. He's not a filmmaker. And what I mean by that is everything that's visually interesting comes from Del Toro's fantasy elements, the set details, the monster creations. Nothing is visually interesting because of how it was shot. Like I made a big deal about this in Kronos, and so I'm going to aim to be concise here rather than just like, oh, it sucked for this reason, it sucked again.
Don't worry, I edited you out heavily in that episode.
That's so good, because I'm sure it was not a good listen.
No,
so
it's fine.
This is gonna be the only real section about this. Del Toro has a Hollywood style about his technique. His camera movements are in the service of narrative. His framing choices are in the service of narrative. His shot lengths are in the service of narrative. Everything is about creating story and moving plot, which he does well, but we see his movies from the single perspective of the narrator. We never get inside the heads of characters because A, they don't have nuance, and B, because the camera never tells us a story. Anything that's important is either shown in a super obvious way or said in express terms. Like he's clearly a clever writer, but Del Toro's movies are visual novels and not suited for the medium of film. But I found it really, like you were mentioning, like contemporary reviews when the film came out. I saw one that was the snippet that titled the link was "Del Toro never coddles his audience," and I was like, did we even watch the same movie? Like he zoomed in on a pregnant belly to show you like how creepy Vidal was when rubbing Carmen's belly.
I wonder if they mean that in terms that movie is violent. And it's not really shy about like that kind of stuff. And I wonder if that's what it meant by you're not coddled. Not necessarily like you're not being coddled, but with storytelling, because you are being coddled with the storytelling. Because everything is kind of pointed out. The problem is that the two different stories they're pointing everything out to you, but they just aren't cohesive. But yeah, I do find that if that's what that article meant by it, that you're not being coddled in terms of storytelling, it's very wrong.
Yeah. So, and to stress, like, I just do not understand the critical acclaim of this film because we'll get into why, but this film is universally loved by critics, but you have all of these messy narrative stories, narrative elements, and there is nothing in terms of camera work, camera language, aspects of the medium that can save it. And you'd be like, okay, well, I really, really love that. Like in a way, like all of Aronofsky stuff is very visually interesting because of the camera. It's like, you might not care so much about the plot or that it doesn't make sense, but all of these things, there's so much fun going on that you can pick up. Like, I like this thing about it. That's not going on here.
I wonder how Nightmare Alley will be, just because going from like Kronos and then Pan's Labyrinth in 2006 to now seeing something, if it's 15 years later, I wonder how, because I haven't seen The Shape of Water.
Oh, really?
I think that was his last film, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
It's really the same as this.
I wonder if his camera technique has evolved at all. But what I want to talk about, we were talking about camera and using the medium. I want to talk kind of about the palette of this movie. It's so odd. The amount of it seems like filters and stuff that are used in this. It seems like the night scenes are kind of like your fairy tale scenes, or they're all very blue, and then sometimes during the day it's very saturated, and you get like kind of really warm colors, and the grass is very green, and it's sort of odd to me. It's kind of flipping the two ideas of what you would think is like comforting colors. Like when she's in her fairy tale time, it's like these cold colors, and then when it's during the day, kind of when she has to deal with the rough parts of her real life, it's kind of these richer colors. But then there's other scenes like Mercedes is like fleeing after she stabbed Vidal, and it's very blue, and it's supposed to be during the day, and so I it feels like the colors are all over the place sometimes, and I think that you can use color to like tell stories, like different mind states that characters are in, or kind of the mood of the scene we're going into. But I don't understand the use of filters in this, or color correcting in this.
Yeah, and exactly. Like, and I think there are like like, think of when the doctor first leaves Carmen's bedroom, and he's talking with Mercedes, and Ofelia is looking out the door, and she matches eyes with Mercedes after she'd been given the medicine. And then Ofelia closes the door, and then suddenly everything's really green.
Yeah.
And I thought that, okay, maybe that's symbolic or anything, but it never comes up again. Like, you have all of these blues, and I really think that there is not I think that it's just meant to show nighttime with all of these blues, but I don't think there's actually a single night shot. I think that because when you look at the contrast between the lights and the darks in those scenes, they look like you've either shot this with a filter or you've color corrected in post, because it looks like if you took that off, like you have sunlight shooting through.
Right.
Because we've seen, I mean, like, think of The Witch. That movie was absolutely shot in the dark because you can't see anything.
Yeah.
So we know exactly what a film looks like that shoots in the dark.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that's why it just is. It feels like all the color changing isn't in the service of anything. So I just wonder why you do it.
Yeah, maybe it's like fairy tale element, like a little bit of it being like mystical and magical and unreal. But that doesn't strike me as the reason he did it, because that's not really what Del Toro does with his symbols.
Right. Let's move to music now. The score. I just want to watch a movie with a really nice big score again. It feels like everything we've done lately is forgettable. Or I think this movie really plays up its musical cues to really let you know to pay attention. You mentioned the scene earlier, which I have a note about, where it's like the first time Ofelia and Mercedes like kind of have a look at each other, and the music like really spikes to like let you know like, oh, Mercedes is up to something, like pay attention right now. And it always seems to happen that way. And I understand that musical cues help an audience, track the story and what's going on. But like, we have no context. We don't even really know Ofelia. We have no idea who Mercedes is. And so it just feels like these musical elements to help you follow along don't really mean anything, because I don't know any of these characters yet. So there's a lot of stuff like that in this movie. I'm not a big fan of little spikes and stuff in a score to help you feel something. Mm-hmm. It seems like cheap to me, but other than that, it's a nice fairy tale score.
Yeah, and I do like, the one thing I do like about it is I can't remember if it was the first time that we heard this refrain, but it's the melody that plays when Ofelia is dying at the end is actually sung to her earlier in the film.
When that Mercedes is like humming.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know if that. Yeah, I like that. That was a nice connection there. I don't know if it was the first time, if that it had played before that, but yeah. Otherwise, it's basically a nice fairy tale sounding score. It plays in the background. It's not intrusive at all, which is nice. But
it's like one time earlier, Mercedes is like comforting Ofelia, and she's humming it to her, and then at the end, she hums it to her again. That's a nice sweet part where.
Well, she's also humming it, but the music is also playing too.
Right.
Yeah, so I like that, like that it exists both diegetically and non-diegetically.
Yeah, I guess. Okay, I do like that part of the score. I just want to listen to something really big again,
Yeah.
Let's get a Hans Zimmer movie again. Let's move on to costumes. I know that this is kind of my forte. This is the stuff I really like. I actually don't have a ton to take away from the costumes. You have a lot of like, rebels in just kind of peasant garb, and then the only other thing is a bunch of soldiers in uniforms. So that the only other thing I really caught that I really liked was I love the king and queens, their robes and everything. That scene at the end is so cool to me. I love the courtroom with them up on their thrones on the pedestals, and then I love kind of the opulent wardrobe they have, all the crushed velvet and silks, and I love the robes draped down across the pedestals. It's all just very robust, and I love that kind of stuff. And so thank you for, I think you put in your notes Connor's time to shine. So
Yeah.
I always love getting if there's a cool costume or a good one, I like pointing it out. So that's kind of the big one. The thing that is the real showstopper in this movie is all the prosthetics and stuff like that makeup. But we can continue. There's some other stuff going on, like the green. There's a lot of green clothing.
Yeah, and I think it's really only between Ofelia and Mercedes, and I think it's supposed to be because those storylines are supposed to be connected. They're supposed to be, I think they're really supposed to be the same character. Because I think Mercedes says it at a couple times, she says once, I don't believe in, I used to believe in fairies, but I don't anymore. That type of thing. They're both wearing green clothing. So I think it's they're meant to have the same outward view on fairy tales or being under the boot of someone oppressive.
Right.
But that's not really connected. And that's really the only reason that I think that. But I like how in the end, when she is in the underworld, Ophelia's dress is really red.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah. So you have some really good comments about the fire in this film. I found it fascinating.
Yeah. Isn't that I think there was one scene where there was actual fire. Everything else was CG'd in because Segovia, Spain, the region that they filmed it in, was in the worst drought of the last 30 years. And so they didn't even use squib packs for the blood. That was all CG'd in because they didn't want a spark from one of the squib packs to start a fire.
Yeah, which is actually fascinating because I think you can usually tell when there's really bad blood CGI. Mm-hmm. I thought there's a lot of shooting and a good amount of blood in this movie, a lot of really close executions. And so the fact that it's all CG, I thought it looked really good.
Yeah. It would also explain why the doctor gets shot in the back below the frame and Ofelia gets shot in the stomach below the frame.
She lifts up her hand. It's just all bloody. That's another part of the color correction that I didn't really fit either because it looks like they really turned up the red.
Super saturated.
Yeah. And then she's in this really blue nighttime setting. That was another part of it. I was like, whoa, it looks like a really stylized shot. It kind of, it definitely caught my eye. Another thing that I was thinking about, because I was reading that note you had about the drought, there's a lot of rain scenes in this. So if they're in the middle of the drought, it's kind of interesting to me that they somehow had the budget and managed to get all the equipment wherever they were filming to have extended rain scenes. I was like, what an interesting use of precious water that this area needs, apparently. So
yeah,
I was definitely thinking about that. The second time I had watched it after I had read that. I'm sure the local plant life really liked it, but I'm sure there's a lot of other places that needed the water.
Yeah, and they also even threw fake green moss in places outside to hide how brown everything was.
I love that. I think that's an interesting job in Hollywood, set dressing. I think is so cool. There's a lot of that. I love all the behind the scenes stuff, and Lord of the Rings is rife with that. I love all the set dressing stuff in those behind the scenes things. So I like finding out more about that. All right, let's move on now to the architecture. I think one of the things I like the most is all the nice. There's a couple big round windows, and I like to think of them as the Fawn mentions that the king opened up all these portals onto Earth so he could find Ofelia. So I liked kind of spotting those. There's not a ton, so I don't imagine it's intentional. But I like the idea of all these big circle windows, like the one in the bathroom. There's one in the attic. I wish there would have been more that popped up, then you could really tie those together as part of that theme or whatever. But for me, it was just a fun little thing to grab. It's kind of the only really interesting architecture, I think, in this movie.
I think there's a few actual interesting details, especially when it concerns the faun. But I like that. I don't think that Del Toro is the type of intelligent filmmaker to make that symbolic connotation of those circles. It's really about circular shapes and bright light around Ofelia, in contrast to Vidal, who has a lot of hard lines and hard light. So all of the rafters and beams in his like office space, which is just strange. But
It looks like he's working out of an old shed. Like,
yeah, it's really weird that like that's where he keeps his child. Like,
he's a insanely weird character and a psychopath. So
absolutely. But yeah, my favorite, really one of the only shots that I think has interesting composition is the 3 circles in the bath. That's the only time I really think that, I mean, I know it's still part of the set design, but it's just something visually interesting that isn't necessarily the point. It's something that's happening in the background.
Right.
Whereas like the entrance to the labyrinth is interesting and it's the point.
yeah, I think too is the like the Pale Man's his big like dining room. I love that set, and I think there are good shots of it. But the it's in service of the story. It's not just like interesting on its own. It's like it's there for a reason to help your narrative, which is speaks to what you've been saying. Is everything is in service of the story, rather than just a cool bit of architecture in the bathroom windows. It's just a cool thing to see every once in a while. So, yeah, I don't have anything else on the architecture.
Well, so the fawn comes up in a couple places. Like his face shape is represented at the top of the entrance, the gateway to the labyrinth. He also, it's not necessarily architectural, but it's mirroring his head shape again. The fig tree with the toad.
Oh, right.
Splits out like his horns. There's a stair railing baluster that has like his head shape, and also the bed headboard. You can see it's actually
I hadn't noticed that.
Yeah, it's his head.
Oh, I like that a lot.
Yeah, so that's carved into there, and like that's kind of why I think that like why the fawn isn't real. You see all of these things where she could have totally taken it from the architecture of the house and then projected it into one of her stories.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's an interesting bit of the story here where you could try and figure out like what's real, what's not. Is some of it real? Is some of it not? I think there are like that's why this movie is still interesting to me, because I think there are theories you can pull from it. What I really want to talk about is all the prosthetic makeup and the creature designs. This is, to me, is what makes this movie really worth watching, because whether or not you get caught up or mixed up with the kind of the different storylines going on, I still think you can watch these scenes, and I love all the interactions with Ofelia and the fawn, and all that stuff only works because the character design is so good and the prosthetic makeup is so good. Who's it? Doug Jones.
Yeah,
does he's the actor underneath all that for the fawn and the Pale Man.
Mm-hmm.
He does that show. I think it's called Face Off. Where he's been like a guest on it.
Oh, okay.
Where that's like a competition where a bunch of prosthetic makeup artists.
I love that show.
Yeah, I think it's so neat. Hannah and I were watching Pan's Labyrinth before, and she was like, "Oh man, I love that guy," because she really likes that show. And I was like, "Oh, the skinny dude." There's some really great behind the scenes shots of him and all of his fawn getup, and he's talking to Guillermo del Toro like he has the dagger in his hand. He's like, "Oh, so you want it in my left hand or my right hand?" He just sounds like just such a total white dude.
Yeah,
but he's like he looks like a fawn. It's amazing. It's like behind the scenes stuff of Darth Vader before James Earl Jones had his voice dubbed in, and post and everything. And the actor playing Darth Vader, he's like yelling, but he just sounds like a guy in like a big, black getup. So it's all just so goofy looking. But yeah, I do really love the makeup and everything of this. I think it would have been really easy to go over the top and give the fawn like big tree branch horns with moss hanging off of him and all this stuff on his face. Like you could have gone real tree beard with it. But I like that he has a real like woody nature element to him.
Yeah.
And his face is kept, clear. That way you can have your actor still emote under it. And I think they do a really good job of that. Like there's real personality to that character because you can actually see facial movements and everything. And I love that about that character.
Yeah, it's really interesting too. Like Doug Jones actually, so Guillermo del Toro approached him about playing the role, but was kind of disheartened that when he found out that everything was in Spanish. So he learned Spanish and he spoke all of those lines. But then like they got to post and he was like, "Man, I'm gonna dub it all."
Oh, I guess I just assumed from the beginning that it was never gonna be his voice, which I should have looked up. I don't know who did the voice acting for that, but it's phenomenal.
Yeah, I can't remember. But yeah, it actually did end up being like good because he tried to speak to the phonetics of I don't know specifically what that dialect is, but it's Spanish, so the C's have a sound which is different than Latin Spanish. So he has all of the correct vocal affects and the lip movements, so that when they did dub it, it looks very, very convincing.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's great. Just another thing that went into like a lot of the design in general. I watched behind the scenes with like the practical effects team and all the artists who are going to be working on this stuff, and they were like, Del Toro is like much more specific and attentive than other directors. Like you'll kind of just show him like a mock-up or like some design you have, and a lot of directors will be like, yeah, just go ahead and make it, that's good. And they were saying that he was like very particular, and he'd come back and be like, no, like that design's all wrong. And he was like, if it looks like something that you'd see spray painted on the side of a van, I don't want it in my movie. So I do love that he's like particular, and I think that's good because a lot of these characters, like they look like they fit in a Del Toro movie. Like they look specific to like his style. Mm-hmm. Another one is The Pale Man, which is also Doug Jones does the acting under that as well. I think what's really cool about that character is he's supposed to look like he was once a really big fat guy, and he had lost a bunch of weight. That's why he has all these like skin folds hanging off of him and everything. I love the way that that's captured. Originally, he had a face though, and they had done a whole like modeling and everything for the face. They brought it in a mask for Del Toro to look at. He sketched the whole thing out and then just removed the eyes, and that was going to be like the final design. So I like the look. I love the look of it. But I feel bad for whoever did all that sculpting, and they're like, yeah, you're going to have to get rid of the whole face.
Yeah. It's also interesting knowing that sagging skin was a design choice Del Toro made because of some of his own weight loss.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, so that's like, it's interesting thinking like of like weight loss as being like a quote unquote good thing. Depending on, I mean, when you're a certain weight loss is definitely good. So to make it a grotesque thing, is kind of interesting. Like yeah, I lost weight. Let's make it gross.
Yeah. I also love that, and this shows up in the Fawn character as well. But you know how the Pale Man has those really skinny legs.
Yeah.
So that's all an actual prosthetic too. That he's just wearing like green leggings, like a green suit under it, so that they can just paint it out. And then there's just the little thin prosthetic on the outside of his leg. I love that. It's the same thing for the Fawn. At the knee, it like bends backwards and then comes back out to the foot. Well, the prosthetic does that, but then his leg still just goes straight down into the foot, and he's just wearing like long green socks so they can paint it out. So all the movement is even still Doug
very
Jones.
real. Yeah.
And I think that all of this only works if you have a good actor underneath all of it. And like I love the Fawn's movement. He's all creaking and kind of shaking, like awake and stuff. Sometimes
the sound design is so cool. Yeah, and also so one of the other inspirations for the Pale Man was the painting, Goya's painting of Saturn devouring his son.
Oh God, I saw that painting because I heard it referenced. It's disturbing as hell.
It is disturbing. I see it a lot of places now because it's just like who would paint that?
I don't know. It is like terrifying to look at.
Yeah.
But I totally get it, and it works well, especially like thematically what that character does later. I love that. That kind of inspiration because I do. It's just the kind of inevitable, like slow moving nature of the Pale Man makes him so terrifying. That scene has always stuck with me, and a lot of that is just creature design. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's tough to say. Like I think a lot of people like when they think back about this movie, or you're talking to someone else about this movie, it's the Pale Man. Everyone talks about the Pale Man, but the Fawn is so interesting as well. But the Pale Man is just so out there in terms of weirdness, craziness, viscerally disgusting and terrifying. Like I remember, like I don't know if I want to watch this,
right?
Because that was always like the thumbnail for like on Netflix.
Oh yeah.
Which is funny because like Pan's Labyrinth, it's all about a fawn. Like what the hell is that?
Yeah. So I want to move into probably the most well-known creature in this is the Mandrake. It's plays such a small role, but it has such an interesting origin story. I don't know if you know this. A mandrake is born from the semen of a man who's been hung at the gallows. What? So like after you've been hung and you ejaculate, semen hits the ground and a mandrake is born. I don't think that has anything to do with Pan's Labyrinth, and it certainly doesn't add anything to this conversation. I just wanted you to know that. That is what a mandrake is.
That is a fun fact.
Yeah. I do have one more interesting bit about the mandrake. The scene where Ofelia puts it in the bowl of milk.
Uh-huh.
That was originally shot with the potato with little visual markers on it. That way the VFX team could then go in and they'll add their CG model on top of it.
Oh, weird.
So then there was a second shot where they brought in a mandrake prop and Ofelia was going to put it in the bowl of milk, and it was just as a reference shot so that way the VFX artists could get the lighting right on their VFX mandrake that was then going to be used in the shot. But Del Toro liked that take better, so they put that in the movie, and it was a big obstacle for the VFX crew because they're like, well, we picked a potato because it was small, and we could put our mandrake on top of it easily. And so then they had to spend a bunch of time painting the whole prop out, and that way they could add in then the CG version on it. So Del Toro making stuff very easy for his visual effects artists.
I can't even imagine why you would choose one of those takes more so over, like, to the point where this one is more important than the other. She is putting a potato in a bowl.
They said her eye line is much better, and she interacted with the prop better, I guess. I don't know. I'm not a director, so... But I can tell you what is that scene makes no difference to me if it was one take or the other. I don't think.
Yeah, you're not looking at Ofelia. You're looking at this weird little like root doll that's suddenly squirming like a baby.
Yeah, it's great though. If you go, there's behind the scenes footage of her just putting a potato in a bowl of milk with these red markers on it so they can track it and everything. It's really funny. We can move on to the toad now.
Yeah, you have a lot of interesting notes on the toad. I just looked at it and was like, okay, that's probably all CG, and I don't really care because it doesn't matter thematically really that much,
right,
other than the overall why we're there in the first place.
Yeah, I love that you let me just kind of go like cut loose on this because this is the stuff about movies that I really like. I love all this behind the scenes stuff, and then in part 2 you can dive more into the characters and all like the narrative and all. You're much better at that. I like this stuff, so I like that. I like that this is a 2-parter because then I can kind of go off on some of this behind the scenes stuff. But the toad was originally, it was going to be puppeted, and it was going to be, they built a really big set, like this sort of cavern underground that Ofelia would get into. She was going to crawl through this tunnel, get into this cavern, and it was going to be like a fight scene, which is odd.
Yeah.
And the toad was going to bounce around all over the room, and it was going to be kind of like an action set piece. Well, Del Toro was like assured that, the prop won't be too heavy, it'll be fine, and it got on set and it was much too heavy for anyone to really move around in any practical way. So they had to redesign the whole scene, and they decided, okay, we'll just have the toad and Ofelia have their confrontation in the tunnel, which was originally just going to be a scene of her just crawling through it. It wasn't going to be anything more than that. But the toad is kind of too big for the tunnel, and they couldn't really operate it well in there either. So that's why the toad essentially became almost entirely CG for the film. But yeah, there's a whole big prop that's like not really used at all.
And that's what ends up deflating then.
Yeah.
When like it shoots out, which I really don't understand the whole visual representation of like it turning inside out. And
that whole set piece is odd, but it's a Del Toro thing. That's what I think. He just does odd stuff. But yeah, I love that idea of, he was like, yeah, the scene was totally different on Friday, and then on Monday we shot something completely different. And just kind of like that flexibility, I think, is like pretty interesting. For a scene that I think is probably the least interesting part of like the fantasy element of the movie, it has like the most interesting backstory on how it got there, I think.
Yeah, I'd say so too, because that's a massive... I don't know why. First of all, I just don't know why you would design a fight scene between the toad, because I also think that it's really more of it's supposed to be representative of the toad being like her baby brother, and it's killing the tree above, which is her mother, and how she can like try and calm the baby so that it stops killing the tree. Like that's what I feel like so to be like, like having like Street Fighter, like the birth canal, it's really weird.
Yeah, I'm glad that narratively that part changed because I think it fits better. But yeah, a big action set piece would make no sense, I don't think. But yeah, Del Toro, he's like, yeah, it was basically like use the set and showcase it, and essentially it would look like there's a tiny toad in it because the set was so big, or like pivot and do it that way. So I think it's good. I think it worked out better for the film that way. It's just interesting to think of a big puppeteered frog or toad that you couldn't really use in a big set, and you also couldn't really use it in a tiny set. So they just CGI'd it.
That's so funny. It's also like, yeah, like that would seem like pacing wise, like to have like something really action packed. Like the Pale Man scene is not like he's chasing her, sure, but it's not like super choreographed. So I feel like it would be really out of place. And this is again like the thing about Del Toro, that like he just doesn't seem to understand sometimes that his elements don't work together. So I'm glad that he was actually forced to cut back on his vision for this, because it works better now.
For sure. So that's all I have for creatures. Thanks for letting me go off on that. We can move on to the characters now, though. We can start with, let's just start with Ofelia.
Yeah, she's really interesting. She's kind of like, I like the way she's depicted in the book. When the blank one that the faun gives her, she has longer hair. She reminds me of like an Alice in Wonderland type character. She's very easy to sympathize with because of that, because, you know, she's got a mean father and a dying mother. She longs to escape her world through the purpose of stories. And like, I think we can all relate to that. This is why this movie is so magical and has such acclaim, is because there is something very human at that core. But she doesn't seem to care about like her nicer things. Like, I mean, she likes the dress, but like everyone likes it more than her. And, you know, the fact that it's like it gets muddy is like really not. She doesn't care so much about the fact she's just cold, and not that she doesn't care that she disappointed anyone.
I love that her mother is so excited about the shoes. She's like, "Look at how pretty these shoes are."
Those.
And Ophelia couldn't care less. I love that.
I also feel like it's weird that they just brushed over the fact that she made her dress. Like, clearly, if her father was her father being a tailor, and her mom clearly was something like it too. It's very interesting that it's just like, I made you this dress, and then moving on. I feel like that could have been something that would work thematically or symbolically, right. And it doesn't seem like it even has anything to do with her character building.
No.
Which is so strange to me. Like, why even include the detail at all? Just say, like, I got, like, look what the captain bought you.
I would have liked that better.
It would have worked better.
Because I think there could have been elements of this movie where Vidal maybe is trying to come across as someone that Ophelia could start trusting. She could see him, and then maybe she sees his true nature, like... just in little snippets, like she's sneaking around and sees how he really is. Yeah. That's how she learns to find him to not be very trustworthy. I would have liked that better than... I think there's other ways you could have worked that in, and the dress would have been a really good one, I think.
Yeah, exactly, because then he's like giving her something, and it's not something like she ruined that her mother made, but like if she had seen the bottle face smashing scene...
Oh man!
Can you even imagine that's really like changing my perception of like the relationship between these characters. But it's very immediately like it's the wrong hand. He like squeezes her hand when she goes to shake it. Like it's just, there's no nuance to him at all. There's no nuance to their relationship at all.
Yeah, I let's just move straight into Vidal, because he might be the most ruthless villain I've ever seen in a movie. He's amazingly cruel, and his introduction, I think, is absolutely perfect.
Fun fact, the studio advised Del Toro to not cast him because he's actually known for more comedic roles. Like, they were like, yeah, you're, from, like, in certain areas of Spain, this character will not play the same. It's like, I feel like it's probably not like Jim Carrey, but it's probably it's like similar to casting someone like that, like to have this, like, such a change of like who this character is, playing such a ruthless. I mean, like, there are very few scenes that I've ever seen where you just get a sense of total depravity. There's no nuance to it at all, but it's like, how sadistic can you be, smashing in the face of a guy who's just like he's not even like back talking you. He's just like speaking for someone else, and like, oh, I don't like that. Like
David Spade walking around shooting rebels in the face. Yeah. I didn't know that. That's Sergei Lopez who plays Vidal. I think he's great. Like, for the character he is in this, perfect. I absolutely love it. And you talked about like the bottle smashing scene, and I love it. He pulls the rabbits out and he tells his like one of his lieutenants or whatever. He's like, search him better next time.
Yeah, it's their fault.
I think he was gonna kill him because he went through the bag too. I think he saw the rabbits and it didn't matter. I think, which to me, that interpretation makes him even more cruel and violent and out of control, is the fact that he knew they were telling the truth and it didn't matter. He was like, well, you're out in my woods or whatever, and like he's going to punish them no matter what. And that just adds to the villainous character, which is perfect for a movie that is a fairy tale movie. You need to have that, like, that wicked witch or like that evil stepmom.
Yeah, that's more psychopathic than it is
Yeah.
just bad.
But then you also have him being the villain that rebels would take up a cause against, and it all doesn't like mesh well to me. But I think if I want to say like a lighter point or a nice point about the cast and everything is he does great. I love the Vidal character in the role he's in.
Yeah, and I do love how they've this is one of the like there's not nuance to him, but there is like depth in terms of that watch. That watch is really interesting because so at first I thought it was completely broken, but it's not. It actually does change time throughout the movie, even if because I was like, okay, he's fixing the gears, maybe like, but the watch, because you don't see the secondhand tick, but in multiple different places the watch is a different time. So the fact that that myth of his father smashing the watch to know the time of his death is weird. It's really more of like an idea of legacy. Like, I'll fix the watch so that my son can pass on the legacy. And I also think it's representative of how the world runs on his time, 15 minutes late, that type of thing.
I like it a lot too. I like the watches, more of that Alice in Wonderland imagery.
Oh.
And also like Ophelia crawling into the tree, it's similar to Alice in Wonderland. I think there's a lot of cool little elements taken from that. But we can move on. We can like briefly about the Fawn because I want to talk more about him in our part 2.
We're going to talk so much about the Fawn
Yeah.
in part 2 because he's going to be in multiple sections. Because, I mean, let's just start with first impression. Like, he seems like, my first impression was like, oh, quirky, very helpful. Like, this is interesting. Like, what, he's going to help her escape. And then, like, he's kind of creepy for no reason, and then like he's impatient with her because she's not completing the tasks on time, and then he's justifiably mad at her, and then that baby bloodletting scene at the end just comes out of nowhere. But
Right.
like it's out of nowhere in a way that
I think there's some build up to it, but
there's some build up to it, but like we've already like kind of gotten the sense like maybe this guy isn't that trustworthy, and I don't think that that's really the point of like the theme of this film. It's about questioning people, but he was giving her the reasons to question him before that. So it's very easy for her to be like, no, that's weird because I already don't trust you.
Right. I think he might be the most confusing character in this for kind of the same reasons you said. It's not only does his look kind of lend to someone like your hero shows up and meets a creature, like another Fawn would be like Chronicles of Narnia.
Yeah.
They meet Mr. Tumnus, and he's like nice Fawn. He's like trying to help him out, but he looks that part. And this Fawn does not at all. He is like kind of creepy looking, and he's like a weird aloof. Like he won't tell Ophelia's name when they first meet. So I think there is some like characteristics to him that would make you think that maybe he has some goal. He's trying to meet his own means, and he's maybe going to use Ophelia to do it. And then the way he turns out in the end, none of that is really justified. So I don't really understand this character, but I also find him to be the most interesting character, which is why I want to elaborate on him more later on.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
Very interesting, but we'll save that. That's a part 2.
So very interesting that you mentioned Chronicles of Narnia. Guillermo del Toro was actually approached about directing those.
Oh,
and
boy.
Turned it down because he wanted to direct this.
Oh, okay.
And he actually considers it his like version, like his Chronicles of Narnia, childlike, but like childlike fairy tale, but viscerally upsetting.
Yeah, no, I could see that. I like that he didn't do Chronicles of Narnia. I just like those books when I was a kid, and I don't need them to be Del Toro'd.
Yeah, exactly. Although he would be perfect for it because like it's a book. He's very good at making books. Like if he made video games, like oh my gosh, like can you imagine him like in the same universe as like Hideo Kojima?
Wasn't he a part of the storyboarding or producing for Death Stranding?
Oh yeah, you're right. That makes sense.
He's in it.
He's in it. I
Yeah.
forgot he's in it. I didn't get far enough in that game to actually enjoy it enough.
That has all the visual elements that you would find in a Del Toro movie or video game or something. So
yeah, he really just needs to make the leap from films to straightforward narrative video games.
Yeah.
He would be one of the greatest of all time.
yeah, like we're saying, maybe narratively and character wise, there's stuff that doesn't work in this film, but visually it's awesome. And if you can make a cool looking video game, I'm all about that. But let's move on to I think the most boring character is Carmen, maybe.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that makes her interesting is if you want to take her and compare her to Ophelia. I think one scene that really spells out their relationship really well and sets up the dynamic of the two characters really well is the scene where Ophelia's just gotten back. She's all muddy from being under the tree with the toad, and she's taking a bath. And Carmen's like, I'm so disappointed in you. Your father's going to be so disappointed in you. And she's like, oh, you mean the captain? And her mom rolls out of the bathroom, and she's just got this huge grin on her face. And I like to think of, like, that's Ophelia is brave, and Carmen is not. Like, she, gave up whatever life she thought she could have and did what she thinks is right for Ophelia, but she married a crazy person because maybe she thought it was right, but she's kind of like a coward in that way instead of trying to maybe figure out a way to do it on her own. And I know she falls ill, and there's all these things that, all these circumstances that lead to that, but I still think of it as, instead of, going at your adventure head on, she was like, you know what, like, let me take this safer route, and I'll go in a place where I know, like, there's wealth and my daughter will be cared for, instead of like going on this adventure and trying to figure stuff out, which is what Ophelia does. So I like that scene a lot for that reason.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because the more I think about it, like, so I think that Ofelia and Mercedes are kind of connected in thematically, but Carmen just exists in her own world, but she should really be the antithesis of the two. She's compromising her integrity and her ideals to give Ofelia a better life. She'd be better off, like, financially. She'd have pretty things. She'd be taken care of. She can, sleep in a bed, and, like, she's not out in the rebel wilderness. She just has to. She's in bed with a fascist. I think that would thematically work a lot better, but we don't care. None of these characters are really connected to each other. Ophelia, Mercedes, and Carmen are just connected because they're in the same
house
space.
Yeah.
Exactly. But they don't really interact in a way that would give them these thematic elements.
Right. I have a hot take for you.
Okay.
I think Vidal killed Carmen's husband. And let me give you a little background on why.
Okay.
So it's following the Toad scene as well. They have that dinner with it looks like other kind of dignitaries, other kind of higher ups that Vidal has had over for dinner. And one of them asks Carmen how they met. And she says, oh, they met at like the shop. And then her husband dies. And then shortly after, Vidal shows up and they get together. So I think it's like he was coveting Carmen, realized like, oh, she's married, does away with Carmen's husband, and then marries her. And then I think he's now resents Carmen because she tries to hold his hand and he pulls away. I think he resents that he went through all this effort to get her, and now she's sick but he's already married her, so he's like stuck with her.
And I think one of the dinner guests even says that it's kind of a coincidence.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, I don't think that's intentional at all, knowing Del Toro, but I like that.
I like that idea a lot.
Yeah, it would really. I feel like, there's just like, we need like a few more things like that to really, really round out the character of Vidal. But I like that a lot, because I think that's a good take. I think that's a very good take. It's certainly in line with his character too.
I think it also lends to Vidal. Also, then he seems to kind of have eyes for Mercedes later, and I think it's because he knows he's like, ugh, like I'm stuck with Carmen, but he's like into Mercedes, but in a very domineering way. It's like very toxic and unhealthy, obviously, but he's making eyes at her, but he's also like, like, oh, cook these rabbits this way, and he's very like creepy about the keys, and he's always seems to like want to have something to do with her, but he's just very aggressive about it.
Yeah,
kind of just a very creepy undertone to everything he does with Mercedes.
And it's funny, saying keys, because obviously that's a Freudian symbol for penises. So, like,
yep, there you go.
I'm the only one with the key.
Yeah.
I have the only copy. Like, in this, he's talking about like the storehouse and having control of all the food and stuff. But it's also a power symbol. It's the same thing. So whether you want to make the equate it to a penis or not, you agree with that. I don't think Del Toro thinks of it as a penis, but that's kind of why it exists, like why keys exist as penis symbols being synonymous with power symbols, is because they control, they penetrate, and only one person has them.
Right. I do want to move on to Mercedes then. I think, like we said, I think her and Ophelia, I think she's just old Ophelia.
Yeah. I think that is what she should be.
Yeah.
If you want to read way more than what this film is giving us.
I actually thought the first couple times, I guess the first time I watched it, I was like, oh, like she's going to reveal that she's also the daughter of the king, and she chose to like forgo eternal life to stay on Earth and like help fight the good fight with the rebels because they're so alike. And I was like, and she does have interactions with Ophelia that lend me to think that they do have a more rich relationship than like any other character does with Ophelia. So I thought for sure that was going to happen, and it doesn't. But she still kind of takes on that role, I think, of like older sister. You know,
Which is funny. She's actually the same age as the actor who plays Carmen. Both Mercedes and Carmen are technically the same age.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah. But that's such a fascinating idea. That's also something I think that would have made this movie better, is if Moana was actually Mercedes the whole time and not Ophelia. That is really, really cool. And another subversion of fairy tale tropes.
right.
That is completely a missed opportunity.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because she only exists in this movie to further the dumb rebels plot. That's it.
Yeah.
And I would have liked if there was a little more to that character, and I think there could have been. So that's why it's unfortunate. All right, well, that's pretty much all I have on characters, and I think that's a good place to wrap up our part 1 here.
Yeah, because we're really going to get into what we think what we think the problems with this movie are narratively, and ways that this can be better.
Yeah, so with that, you can reach us at nowthisidpodcasting100@gmail.com. We also upload all these to YouTube and have a comment section there. I like checking those and seeing what everyone has to say. You can also find us on any podcast platform like Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Yeah, so with that, we're wrapping up part 1 of Pan's Labyrinth. Please join us for part 2, and thank you for listening to Now This Is Podcasting.